Welcome, adventurers, to another enchanting episode of Lore Drop. I'm Dungeon Master Eguile.
And I'm DNDWife, your guides to the hidden depths of the world of Extrayus.
Tonight, we unravel the secrets that lie beneath the surface of our homebrew campaign. We'll dive into the lore, the legends, and the magic that makes Extrayus so captivating.
We'll explore the stories behind the realms, the characters, and the world building that brings our adventures to life.
Whether you're a dungeon master seeking inspiration, a writer crafting your own fantasy worlds, or just a fan of immersive storytelling,
there's something here for you. Join us as we reveal the mysteries of Extrayus and share our creative journey with you.
Get ready for a new lore drop, where imagination meets creation. Let's embark on this magical adventure together. For centuries, the Mirren tribes fought, hunted, and survived in the untamed lands of Extrayus. But among them, one tribe rose above the chaos, the first to forge unity from war, the first to seek honor in strength, the Rohmar. Born from conflict, guided by tradition, and destined for greatness until betrayal shattered their legacy. Who were the Rohmar? What led to their rise and their tragic fall? And how did one Lionfolk's choice change the fate of an entire people? Join us as we unravel the history of the most honorable and most exiled of the Mirren. Welcome to Lore Drop. Obviously, we have been going over the last few lore drops of the Mirren folk, which are our anthropomorphized creatures that live in our homebrew land of Extrayus. And this is a very special one in that I wasn't the only one who helped in creating this, and that this was actually helped by one of my players who happened to also pick that as the starting race. Thank you for joining us, Richard.
Thank you as always for having me.
But as we've already been sharing, we've been discussing some of the other tribes, most recently with the Eguile, being the peaceful water kind of tribe. We're now moving more inland to essentially what is the founders of the kind of Mirren unity that we see in the world today. Today's focus will be on the Rohmar. This was the first organized Mirren tribe, essentially the first to what I call reach advanced sentience, to go from walking on 4 to walking on 2. But in the issue, though, is that obviously being the first also leads you to a lot of openings for issues, both influence and for controversy, because of being the first, to this kind of goal. But today we're going to be talking about a few different things, as we do with the lore drops, to kind of give you an example of not only in the efforts and what goes into creating a homebrew race in your own worlds, but also a little bit of the culture and a little bit of the kind of history that comes to them. Talking a little bit also about betrayal. And also the ultimate kind of exile that we see in our current status in our homebrew D&D campaign that is also featured in our homebrew world of Extrayus. As always please rate, review, like, subscribe, share any way you can this podcast. Any preferred platform, we don't mind. We are pretty much on every podcasting platform you can think of. But we also enjoy if you would come and join us on the Couple of Nerds Discord server. This is where we post a lot of photos, information, as well as you can connect with myself and other players so you can learn even more about our homebrew world.
Absolutely.
But also, this is also a place where you can also have Q&A sessions with myself and other players. We tend to always be in the Discord chat in one way or another. So if you're working on your own homebrew world, come on by, ask a few questions. Hell, we might ask you to help build some of our world as well.
Oh, that'd be so much fun.
But obviously with everything, and as we've been talking, it's always tough to kind of get that idea of like, where do you start? What exactly is the origins of the Rohmar? Now, the Rohmar, as we've been talking, a lot of these characters we're using are just essentially spin-offs of D&D 5e. Whether you like WotC and however you feel about the, different licensing agreements, we found that, you kind of always have a starting point. And now obviously we use D&D characters, but you can use just about any folklore, any kind of myths, legends, television shows, to kind of get started.
Beast folk exist everywhere.
Right. And I feel like Lionfolk, in essence, are always kind of very established in fantasy lore.
Oh, yeah.
As kind of being not only prideful, but honorable, warriors, strong, and that kind of thing. And so, we wanted them to be more than just your standard, Lionfolk warriors. Now, D&D kind of feel like does them a disservice by really kind of pinning them into this kind of like Greco-Roman-esque, philosophy and the gods, and they're ones that resist, and it plays on them. But we wanted to break that entire idea. We didn't want to go with that. We wanted to have something different. So we really wanted to have a distinct cultural, linguistic, societal, that really kind of spun it on its head, which, as you've been listening to Lore Drop, is probably some of the things that I do the most. I like taking tropes, flipping them upside down, and letting people make assumptions that they usually make and have them be the exact opposite.
Right, and then be surprised.
Now, this was a cool situation, and this is why we brought you here, Richard, today, is that I wasn't the only one who made up this character, whereas most of the other Mirren are exclusively me. Yep. This was a special case because you happened to pick wanting to be a Leonin to start our brand new campaign. Yeah. What made you pick Leonin?
It's the farthest from anything I had done before. I always try and do something that's pretty juxtaposed or different from something I had already done before. I'd already done 2 humanoids, and I was looking at a lot of the beast races, and we've touched on or seen a lot of them. Some of them are more common, like Dragonborn and Lizardfolk and whatnot, but I can't remember ever seeing or hearing anybody in most media playing a Leon, and I think they're pretty easily overlooked. It's like you said, it's kind of getting put into like a warrior-esque just NPC character. So I wanted to take something like that and do something different with it. Like you said, flipping images on their head. I wanted to pick something that was big and scary looking to actually be very kind and gentle.
That's really nice.
Right. I feel like it always kind of comes back to like Aslan. Like you just can't help yourself, like talking lion, Aslan.
Lion Jesus.
Yeah, right. and so it is that kind of like you wanted to put a new spin on that. And I think when we were making Extrayus, kind of the big spin on it was we wanted the human type characters to be secondary in a world. Yeah. We didn't want them to be we didn't want them to be the inheritors of the world. Yeah. So as we've been talking about the Mirren are the true kind of species of the planet. Yeah. They are the inheritors of the world.
I'll be honest, it also makes a lot more sense. Sometimes I'm confused when I see like fantasy, unless it's explained as humans just have like innate like better technology. It doesn't make sense in D&D sometimes where it's like, oh, the worlds are mostly controlled by humans. It's like, do they just outpopulate because like gnomes or whatnot are like way more magical, dwarves are way more architectural, building giant cities, living way longer, elves way more knowledgeable in magics and whatnot, but then somehow humans always end up like owning these huge castles and swaths of land, and I'm just like, is it just biased because we're all people? And
right. And so that was kind of, I think, the interesting point with you picking this, and then with you not really knowing, because obviously when you picked your character, you didn't know the impact or what was going on. So I remember making the decision, and I think I sent it to you about, okay, you're picking this class or this race, and we don't have anything for this yet. It's a brand new thing. What do you want to do? So I essentially tasked you with establishing at least some basics, part of your backstory, of creating a little bit of the culture. Now, I mean, I imagine as a player, that's fairly intimidating.
A little bit, right?
It's not really, actually. I was going to say, it's one of my favorite things to do, and it might just be a more isolated case because you're the DM, but it feels like I can just throw out a lot of my ideas that usually I would probably just be throwing into the wind and only sticking like 1 or 2 of them, but you managed to take everything I say and then make it like more cohesive and how it like flows together and makes sense. Like sometimes I feel like I'm just jabbering ideas and it's like, okay, what it sounds like you want to do is this, 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 and this. And I'm like, exactly that. Gotcha. I couldn't figure out how to put it out there.
Of course.
Yeah. And so obviously granting you this blank slate, you did actually come up with kind of 4 distinct clans to start off with.
Which I think are super cool.
Right, and so that's the Shadowmane, the Ember Eye, the Gold Claw, and the Iron Fang. Now, I haven't actually asked you this, but where did you actually come up with the idea for these 4 clans?
So it's an odd mix. I think I wanted to have like if the understanding of like all these different tribes coming together. I thought it would make sense that the tribes themselves, if they were coming from different regional areas, might have different unique talents or things trades that they were more aligned to. And then as far as like the separation of them, I kind of just looked at lions in different like colors and like schemes that they have, and I thought it makes sense where like if they were sticking more to their own tribal sense, then like some of them would look more like, you know, most Shadowmanes, all of them are going to be black. You know what I mean? Besides like little here and there,
little chocolate every
or
now
like
and then.
you might meet like a black Leonin who may be like an Ember Eye or something, but it's probably because they married out and stuff like that.
See, and that just shows like what I've said in a bunch of previous lore drops is like you can use a lot of like, you know, real world context to build a lot of your fantasy story. I mean, you know, and so as you gave me these kind of instructions, I ended up, you know, like you said, expanding off of this with what originally for the most case were just names. And so we end up building into like the Shadowmane, which are the, you know, the natural born leaders and warriors, kind of the much larger, known for, you know, this like physical strength to them, and they're very strategic. You know, they would later become obviously the ruling class. Now, this played into the fact that you chose to be a Shadowmane, and obviously wanting the player to have a little bit of impact. I thought it was only right to essentially make that kind of one of the more powerful tribes. Then you have the Ember Eye, which is more of your shaman, mystic, and historians, right? We've stretched a lot in our lore that obviously with the Mirren being an animal folk and language being a tough kind of thing to develop, especially when you just recently reached sentience. They would have more of needing ways to share information.
More oral tradition.
And if you listen into the Traveler's Chronicles, you hear a lot of the Mirren sharing stories, and they're always being elders, and the old being so valuable. And that there's always a kind of an importance played on the eldest of the Mirren.
Yeah, I imagine that not a lot of the beast races in general have like a sense of writing. I know when we talked about the Leonin, it's one of the reasons I took a sign language. And then when we talked about any writing systems or markings, they would be like how Native Americans used to do like tree scratchings and whatnot, like markings to where you wouldn't see fences or anything, but you'd start seeing markings once you're meeting into someone else's territory.
It's not like they're leaving a note like "get out of our land."
Well, in a way they are. It's
just more of like a "hey, know where you are. Here's a sign." You know,
right? And then we have like middle ground too, right? So then we have kind of more of kind of showing an evolution of the Rohmar with like the Gold Claw. Now that's your kind of your golden tongue, your merchants, your diplomats, your traders. You know, they have that great charisma and negotiating skills, and this kind of also shows where you can introduce like D&D elements or story elements also with the mechanical side. So if you're like, oh, well, you know, you want to have these, you know, different clans or tribes have different specialties. Well, now they kind of play into the game structure as well. So you want a charisma-based Leonin? Well, now you have a Gold Claw, you know, and that Rohmar is the type that's going to have a charisma bonus. And it's kind of now explained within the story as well. And that's really important when building your characters. If you can also have your gameplay mechanics be part of the story, you're skipping an extra step that you'd have to wave in.
That totally makes sense.
Right, because now you don't have to you've already done both. You don't have to come back now and go, okay, what modifiers go to what? What are their specialties? No, you already got it in the story. And an easy way to also see that is the Iron Fang clan, right? And these are your master blacksmiths, your toolsmiths, your craftsmen. You know, these are the ones that essentially brought the Rohmar into the Iron Age, which explains that, you know, obviously that with advanced sentience comes tool making. And this just kind of shows the microcosm that I love, Richard, that you kind of created is that even within the tribes and the clans themselves, you see almost an evolutionary of like those who kind of follow old ways, those who are doing the new technology, those who are reaching out. And it really kind of shows that the Rohmar to me is the microcosm of the greater Mirren kind of consciousness.
I know before I've acted them a lot towards like Native American, but another influence I had is almost like the Khans and the
Khans with a K, right?
Yeah.
I'm just playing.
You know, the cons and whatnot, and like more of their roaming tribes and how they would like take in people and then help influence the entire empire. And I imagine, like, I know it wasn't especially like mentioned before, but like all the tribes, I imagine wherever they were more centrally located had either an abundance or a lack of resources that would influence. Like maybe the Iron Claws, their area had more iron rich areas.
They were more to the mountains.
Perhaps the golden eyes,
Golden Claw.
Golden Claws.
Oh, your own creation, but it's tough. It
the
happens.
Golden Claws here may have had like, you know, silks or other like fineries that they were able to trade.
I feel like they were also closer to the boundary between others, you know, so they actually saw more of other Mirren.
A lot of the more of the trade. They were probably had more abundant like resources, so they didn't have to worry about like fending for food and stuff. Like they can go to like the luxuries.
And I think when also talking about the kind of our creation process to the Rohmar, I think one of the funnier parts and the thing that shows that you can kind of go anywhere is the choice of accent. Obviously, you know, there's always been that long running joke. You know, you got dwarves are always Scottish,
of course.
You know, elves always speak in a high upper dialect.
They're always
you know,
British,
right? You know, and so it's that thing where it's like, let's be something different.
And I always loved doing that. That's why, like, my first character, I had a wood elf who was the most crass, cursing, like, unsophisticated character.
Total opposite.
And I always love the idea of that, or of like, you know, seeing like this very like long robed wearing like regal elf with like long white hair that comes at you and has the most hit country accent.
Right.
And it's just like, oh, okay, like I had no idea what I was expecting.
And like, you know, that kind of goes into it because as we started the story, obviously, I don't know if you knew that kind of impact, but it really is kind of like, obviously, if you are a player playing that race or that character in a brand new homebrew world, sometimes as a dungeon master, let your players do that, right? Let your players set kind of, okay, what is the communication style for now their species? Because in essence, they are the ambassador. So what really made you choose an Eastern European accent for your Lionfolk Rohmar?
As everything I do, it's like kind of pass backwards where I find a cool mechanic or something that I want to do, and then I find like ways in the story to like justify things. So it started off with our rule of if I have a bad habit of talking out of turn in character and just saying things. And if my character is using my own normal voice, it's hard to differentiate when I'm just telling jokes when my character is talking crap.
Yeah, saves the knee-jerk response.
Yeah. So I found if I talked in an accent, it's very easy to differentiate if it's an in-character comment or not.
That makes sense.
And as far as the choosing of Eastern European, I feel like it's probably one that you can do with the least amount of people getting offended. And I watched a lot of FPS Russia as a kid, and I always did a bad Russian accent. And I knew it was one I could do consistently, but without it ever needing to be like either really bad or really good. I think even when I'm doing it bad, it's funny, and if I'm doing it really good, it's funny. I've never gone for accurate. It's literally a mix of FPS Russian, which is an actual like Texas guy. He has no accent, and then Roman and Nico Bellic from GTA.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that does set a lot of the precedents for the character as well as the species, right? Like, kind of the accent or the way they speak does automatically kind of create, like you were just saying, you know, you give an elf like this, you know, supposed redneck, you know, dialect, you're automatically no longer thinking they're the smartest group in the bunch.
No, they could be a genius, but you're like, oh, you know, no, thank you.
And so I think that really showed with creating kind of this accent as being, it kind of played into also kind of that cooperative nature with obviously Eastern Europeans also being known for being very boisterous and very friendly.
Loud,
very loud, friendly. Yeah, exactly. Like everyone eats, everyone enjoys.
It goes back
You're too skinny.
Playing on opposites, where it's, you know, it's the go-to bad guy voice.
That's true.
So again, it's that whole like, oh, your healer who runs up to you is this 7 foot something tall, like intimidating lion with a thick Russian accent. And is only there to help.
Right. And then he goes, hello.
So, but I think that's really good. And so it just shows that, like, creating characters or species or whatnot, it really goes just like picking a little bit of here, picking a little bit of there. And then also the organic nature of just, you know, for DMs out there, allowing your player to kind of shape it unknowingly. You don't even have to tell them. Just let them start making up the lore for their people. Ask them questions during the session. What do you know? Oh, what's this? What's this for this person? And, you know, slowly but surely, it's going to flesh itself out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So when looking at, the Rohmar, it really, you have to look at kind of their rise and before you look at the fall.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to their origins and their creation, we obviously had Richard to help. But when it came to their culture and history, that's when the dungeon master kind of steps in order to create that. And as I said, the Rohmar essentially in the Mirren's timeline was the first to reach sentience.
Yeah.
And I play this to the fact that lions are so intelligent in the wild, and they are kind of this apex predator, right?
That's right.
And an apex predator that doesn't necessarily actively assert its power, right? It just exists, and everyone knows. Chill the
Stay
hell
away.
out.
It's almost like the Lion King, where it's like they have the overarching, everybody knows who the power is, so nobody's really scuffling underneath them.
Yeah, and so similar to like our own lions here on Earth, the Rohmar have this strong sense of pride and territorial dominance, right?
Yep.
Their lands are their lands.
Yep.
And as we've said in other lore drops, as everyone who's been listening, the Mirren kind of have this like pigeon-like homing mechanism where they all kind of know where their territories are.
Yeah, where all their lines are.
And so they never really cross in that regards. But where that can be different is if there are multiple clans within the Mirren. So what happened really is as these, powerful creatures began reaching sentience, you start to, which was played much off of, like, as Richard, you said, the physicality. So they see one type, another type, another type. Well, who's the real one?
Yeah.
Obviously, when we produce, ours look like this. They don't look like you. So it became, in the early years, the Rohmar were dividing themselves, each believing that each of the individual clans was the true Rohmar race, right? They were the ones that were the real ones, and that these were essentially other creatures that were, for some reason, encroaching into territory that no other Mirren had done before.
Oh, geez, okay.
Right, and so
misunderstanding.
And so it just leads to these brutal conflicts that none of the Mirren had seen through any of their development because they just stayed out of each other's territory.
Yeah.
So for the first time in Mirren history, there is actually internal, bloody, deadly conflict between essentially what are the same. I mean, they are the same tribe, but to them, they are different, vying for it, and have really no understanding because, as Richard said, language isn't being developed yet. It's more of just this territorialness, and all they know is, this is my home.
Yep.
Why are you here?
Right, you need to get out.
Right, and so this lasted for generations because it's not like wars that occur in our world where, borderline territories get involved and you're like, oh, it's going to spill over to us. No, all the other Mirren don't really even know or understand this. They look at each other like, why are they, essentially the Rohmar are senselessly killing each other because all the other Mirren know them to be because that's their territory.
People, yeah.
So it really created this like stalling approach to their growth in the early development where all the other Mirren, given their lack of these kind of extreme diversities, didn't really have that kind of problem.
That's true.
I imagine it's what happens when you evolve into pockets. So everybody comes up with their leader and then goes to meet the others, and they're like, "Wait, no, I'm the leader."
Yeah, I'm the big boss. It's like, but I am. It's like, and any kind of subtle difference between the two becomes like the central focus. So in this case, your fur looks different.
Yep.
You can use magic, we can't.
Right.
So obviously you're different. Not realizing, like you said, as you created these regional differences, not realizing they're all from the same area.
Yeah, they're the same.
And so what ends up happening is more of what usually happens in these kind of conflicts. And the way I always look at it is, old fight. They fight, they kill, they know, they live their life. But when the young die is when things change.
Yeah.
In that no matter whether you are a beast, whether you are a man, what does not matter, in that when the young's blood is spilled, it changes everything. And what ends up happening is essentially, as in the tale of old this time, what ends up crossing the barrier? Children.
Yep.
Children
As they
don't
play,
see differences.
They get lost.
They don't understand these things. And so what you actually saw was, as the Shadow Mane and the Iron Fang are the closest and fought the most aggressively against each other, given that the Iron Fang were able to kind of leverage against the strength of the Shadow Mane with weapons and tools.
Yeah.
But when their children began interacting with each other and not seeing the same differences, what ends up happening is the loss of life. And in doing so, what this actually created was the first unity of any of the Mirrens. Because essentially the two strongest tribes of the Rohmar kind of had enough at that point.
They had to come together or
hurt each other, or kind of understood, and really what it became was the Shadowmanes. And the Shadowmanes kind of stepped up, and because of their military, like their strategic planning, they essentially were able to now start curbing the civil wars without loss of life, pushing for more of trials of combat, not of death.
Okay, like duels.
And that essentially problems or issues would be trials of strength rather than wars fighting each other. And by doing this, it allowed essentially the groups to come together and slowly start understanding that there really wasn't a difference.
Not at all.
And what started to see kind of them coming together as a group and start realizing how they fit into essentially areas that the other groups were necessarily lacking, whether it be the kind of magical access that the Rohmar didn't have, or whether it be the gift of gab and opening up communication lines that the Rohmar never knew. In fact, the Gold Claw were actually the first to actually establish the Rohmar's language. So they are the progenitors of an actual verbal language that is essentially what we play as common, but in essence is more like Mirren. And really, the Gold Claw were the ones that started essentially creating a language that could be transcended past the different Mirren groups.
What you could call a common Mirren language.
True, right? And so really, once that started to happen, the Rohmar essentially saw that by obviously unifying and then separating the tasks, they were able to not only unify their territory, but started reaching out past, which no Mirren had done before because they stay in their territory, as we've said before. But because of this, they were now actively going out. And so this is where the Rohmar's role in Extrayus really changed up. Now, this was the first place because essentially what they realized is, hey, if we in this inner group all came together, what would it be like if we all came together? All the Mirren, all these species, other creatures they've seen. Now, what we've shared in the Mir Shah. Now, if you've caught the Mir Shah lore drop, if you haven't, please go back and listen to it. It's a great episode. But what we shared was that the early times, they were the ones that had the closest and largest kind of border between the two tribes. And so that really was the first of the kind of intra-tribal unity, because essentially they offered a trade. Is the Mir Shah would train more of the Rohmar in these kind of weird styles of fighting that the Mir Shah was known for, and then the Rohmar, thank you, all these new names, always tough to pick up, would provide more of resources like water and food. And so that was when we saw the first of kind of the exchanging. And this really kind of ties in. And I always laugh because, like you said, with the cons, right? Like taking in people. I didn't know that about your creation. And this just naturally occurred where the Rohmar actually do. They send their own out as a symbol of connection and unity. As, look, we are sending our young to learn and take from you so that we can also share and you can take from us. And really, I feel like it's kind of funny that we were on the same page, Richard, even without actually ever really discussing that whole aspect.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I ended up making like 4 totally different like clans instead of just the one, because it would have been really easy to just been like, oh, royal family, there's no actual like, you know, differences in like physiologically. It's just this one family that's this name. But I wanted it to be like you said, everybody has a different strength that they needed to bring together. And you know, if you would just take in one tribe and put them up, they would be able to do things on their own, but it would never be as whole as if you had all of them together.
Right. Yeah. And so what ends up becoming impactful, and we'll have to share more of this individual's story because this individual, who was the first Rohmar to be sent out as part of this kind of exchange, was a Rohmar by the name of Tarjan Shadowmane. Now, for those you don't know, if you've been listening to Traveler's Chronicles, you would know a little bit more of the story of Tarjan Shadowmane. But we'll go into that a little more later on in a different lore drop. But the interesting is that this actually is a descendant of your character, Richard, which I don't think you quite expected to be as deeply linked to you.
I thought I would have some like lasting echoes of maybe his legend and whatnot, but I didn't think it would be so directly tied in as it
I think
is.
you meant he's the ancestor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No
Other way around.
Yeah.
But really what it showed was this individual who kind of saw what it was when working and how much more successful the Mirren were when multiple Mirren and multiple species worked together and saw that power. He ended up going on a crusade with his companions who made up different Mirren from all over the lands, which was unheard of, and even some species from other lands. He really pushed for not only the Mirren to come together, but for all of them to come under one banner, that they weren't just the Rohmar, the Seagless, the Meerschaum. They were Mirren.
Yep.
They were one unified group.
One
And that
people.
really Tarzan wanted to push the idea of to not make the mistake that we as the Rohmar did during our Civil War, where we just looked at our differences and said, you are the other and you must go.
Right.
It's like you're talking about first and the responsibilities that come with it, because I always believe it is crucial to be first in a lot of these things, but being first also always means being the first to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And usually there's a lot of repercussions from that, because people then start associating the only mistake that's been made with you.
Right. And that's really interesting that to go on to that, because obviously as Tarzan kind of unified and created what we later refer to as the Mirren Confederation, it does become that issue because really when you are trying the first thing out, everyone really is expecting you to fail.
Yeah, and they're just looking at you and every mistake you make.
Yeah, and especially, 4 tribes slaughtered each other for decades. Now you have the 20, 30 or so different Mirren trying to come together, which only can lead to a breeding ground of issues. And that's really what ends up happening later on as the Rohmar interact with the world. And as the story continues, we eventually learn of what becomes known as Tarzan's betrayal. And that during a course of events, as we've gone in a lore drop of the creation story, in that he was complicit in what allowed for the destruction of the elves.
A little bit.
And this betrayal, being a people who have never experienced betrayal before, never ever even thought that was possible, that fractured and destroyed a little bit of what was kind of keeping together the Mirren folk.
I don't think it's just the fact that it was one of the first and biggest betrayals. I think it's also like a betrayal from the person who's been the face of unification the whole time. It like immediately gives rise and energy to anybody who was a naysayer or was arguing for the differences between races. It goes to be like, oh, well, see, like now you can't trust
They
them.
must be right.
And what the crazy thing too is like when it is that thing, and I kind of look at it like when, you finally go, okay, murder is now wrong. Nobody murdered.
Yeah.
But the first person to murder, and you go, oh, well, how do we punish this?
Yeah.
And so for Mirren, it is that special circumstance where we've talked about it in a bunch of lore drop. All Mirren have this sense of unity, this sense of connection to their continent, to their territory.
Their home.
So how do you essentially put the punishment to fit the crime? This massive betrayal of not only the Mirren, but the world itself that has been, plagued with problems that have now been connected to the Shadowmanes and the Rohmar as a whole. What they ended up leading to was the only thing they knew to do, obviously wiping them all out. The Rohmar are too powerful.
Yeah, I can't do that.
But what ended up being decided was exile. And this reaches so much deeper, as it's not just exile from the community or like what I label as a lot of like Amish shunning, where they just don't even acknowledge their existence. But they are also pushed out of their lands, which to Mirren is a big deal.
Wow.
I'd say that's also another thing, is it's not even a exile as in like you're never allowed to interact with this again.
Yeah.
It's more of like a social exile. Like everybody just decides that you're less known, that they aren't going to deal with you. There was no like official like nobody
Decree.
can. Yeah, there was no decree. It's just everybody kind of decided like, okay, just put him into
we're
the
not
corner
dealing
now.
with
It's just the lesser of less is really what it comes down, and it allowed now what was a group of people that have always been led by these kind of powerful leaders that are the Shadowmanes, a part of the Rohmar, now are leaderless. And ends up moving to the next, which is the most intelligent of the Mirren, which is the Tuscari. And so obviously, if you've spent what essentially is your entire lives under the control of what you believe to be a predator, you are going to try everything in your power to ensure that they continually are kept down.
Yeah, and that those predators can never come back and prey again.
Right? And so the Rohmar are pushed westward from the continent, all the way to the western, away from everything, away from where they have spent essentially their creation, and now are facing this kind of infighting now with not only are the Mirren, the greater Mirren looking at this as an issue, but the Rohmar internally see this as struggle with obviously kind of starting to fall back, which we see a lot of times. You fall back into those old safety nets where it's maybe we are different because we three clans never would have done that. It's only now the Shadow Mains. They were the ones, and maybe we need to separate ourselves from.
Maybe
Going back to being the first, it is one of those things where if there's no other examples of comparison, it's very easy for people to be like, well, I would have done better there, or I would have never done anything like that, especially if you've never been in whatever circumstances occurred.
And the nice thing is that this is kind of where we are in the story right now. If you listen to Traveler's Chronicles, it's really you're kind of would be in a front row seat to kind of hearing a little bit of Tobias's experience with prejudice and kind of the shun that's going on. And so what we have now is kind of the kind of placemat for the Rohmar and to see where they go. And it really creates an interesting, because if you're creating these new characters, you're creating these new species, and your player is one of them. This is that great opportunity that I've used to allow these people to grow and be decided based on the player. So now the player isn't necessarily always just deciding, okay, how does my person, so in this case, Tobias, be, but it's also, well, everything also reflects even further onto my people that I, as a player, know that I put more into. And I think it also gives more weight to Tobias as a character because he also knows this history, but doesn't necessarily know the real history.
Right. Or where it's heading.
So I think there's a lot of future, options for the Rohmar, and we really kind of have to see where they go. We have to see, will they ever regain this honor that they lost, this kind of respect from the entirety of essentially their people. And it also is kind of an idea, and it'll be interesting to see when the story finally moves back to this kind of new home for the Rohmar, because we might by that point see a whole new leadership. We might see another clan take over, and could see a very well change in the entirety of how the Rohmar interacts with its community. They might take a more, reactionary form, or maybe, if they wipe out the Shadow Mains and just say, hey, we're only 3 now, that could be a potential in the future.
Yeah, that's true.
But really, it really shows that as we move forward in the story of Tarjan and the story of Tobias are really going to shape how the Rohmar and how we build more into our homebrew world, that we're using both our D&D campaign and the conversations you and I have, Richard, about different things when it comes to the Rohmar. And those are really the ways, because I feel like, and I talk about this a lot, building your world, it's organic. If you try to write everything down at once, if you just try to say, okay, let's do it, you get pigeonholed, you get locked in. That organic changes, those growths, and the way we've seen it just in the Rohmar really show how the impacts of the player, the impacts of the DM, and the impacts of the game really shaped how they grow.
Oh yeah, we learned so much. And I think it's unique, right? Because you got this really cool, unique chance to create a little bit of that background for yourself, Richard. But it really informs it. I think it makes it more real too when we're playing on the table. Like this is a real people that I belong to. It's not just me.
Yeah, I tried giving interesting lore, but I feel like the nuance that like John brought into it makes it feel a lot more grounded, and it gives me something easier to like latch onto, and like more directive of like how to react. Because I almost feel like if there wasn't as much scrutiny on to Tobias, it would have been kind of easy to forget that I'm supposed to be kind of rebuilding a reputation for people and to just do whatever I wanted to. It's a weirdly good double-edged sword of like how much scrutiny is put onto him and how it reflects, because as long as he keeps doing good, it's going to continue to they're like, oh well, maybe we're wrong, and as long as he keeps doing good, but if he does mess up, it's going to immediately do the opposite
Reflect
effect.
badly on him, yeah. But
And-
it's a good motivator.
Plus, there's also the little extra parts of that. Tobias is capable of using magic, which is a different clan that he is not a part of.
Yeah.
Which I could see future of maybe being ways of even more creating unity amongst them, to where maybe eventually we could see that there isn't these 4 distinct clans.
Yeah.
I wanted Tobias to
Bunch of
always
calicos.
be a like a uniter kind of his clans. I wrote in for his mother to be from a different tribe and to have been teaching like very plant-based and like medicinal type healing and whatnot. For it to be different from like his whole bloodlines, just all warriors and training all day.
All the tacticians.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and so obviously, as always, thank you if you've still been tuning in for this long run. I know sometimes these lore drops can get a little deep, but that's the whole point.
Yeah.
As a way for people to kind of see how that, we just kind of start by throwing things on the ground and seeing what sticks. And
Yeah,
that
what we
there's
like,
no
what
right or
works.
wrong way to build characters, to build a homebrew world. And that the biggest thing, too, is to know that it's an evolving thing. It can always change. It can always become something different.
It almost feels like a Build-A-Bear, where you're like, you go
A
around the
Build-A-Lion.
bins just picking out like the little assets and accessories you like, but then like later somebody, in this case you, takes all the pieces, puts the bear together and hands it back to you, and it's just like amazing. It's what you were imagining, but in a way that you couldn't fully realize.
Yeah. And as always, be sure to like and review this podcast, especially if you're listening on YouTube. Every like helps us get a little further in the algorithm.
Yep.
And
Remember
also,
to
we
subscribe.
encourage you always to join our Discord. Come talk to us, share your stories. If you've seen our lore drops, let us know that lore drop is the reason you came, and we can share more information. I'm always loving to talk more world building with anyone I have a
We'd
chance
love to hear from you guys.
And don't forget our next episode as we continue into our deep dives of the Mirren. We're going to hop into the next of the leadership of the Mirren, which is the Tuscari. These current Lionfolk are the ones currently running the show, but it doesn't quite seem like they care much for their fellow Mirren people. They seem to just care about getting their diamonds and jewels and getting every sweets they can eat.
Oh, man. Well, the Rohmar's legacy is one of strength, unity, and ultimately tragedy. Their story's far from over, though, and who knows what the future holds for them in Extrayus.
History is written by those who survive it, and the Rohmar are still fighting for a place in this world. But that's a tale for another time.
If you love today's deep dive into the Mirren lore, be sure to like, review, and share the podcast. And hey, come chat with us on Discord. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
And again, thank you, Richard, for joining us on this special lore drop. I really wanted to have you here since you were pretty much the main helper for me to make these people.
I am always willing to come by and talk more about world building and lore. You can't get me to shut up about this.
But until next time, travelers, may your rolls be high and your lore be deep. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Lore Drop. We hope you enjoyed exploring the rich lore and magic of Extrayus with us.
But the adventure doesn't have to end here. Join our Couple of Nerds Discord community to dive deeper into the world of Extrayus, share your own stories, and connect with fellow adventurers.
And don't forget to check out the Couple of Nerds YouTube channel. There you'll find all our content, from thrilling campaign highlights to miniature painting tutorials and more.
We love hearing from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts, questions, and ideas. Who knows, your input might just inspire our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through Extrayus. Until next time, keep your imagination alive and your dice ready.
Stay curious, stay creative, and may your adventures be ever wondrous.
See you in the next Lore Drop.